In the sweltering maze of Ouagadougou's main market, a boy, barely 13, tall and lanky, was slammed against a crumbling concrete wall. Two armed guards, their uniforms dusty from the midday heat, held him fast. "You look like a thief," one of them growled, yanking at the boy's worn shirt, dark as coal and just as dismissed. His mother screamed from behind her fruit stall, but no one moved. Heads turned away, eyes dropped. Fear swallowed the air. Watching from the shadows was Kédougou Bamba. Once he had been that boy. Now he wore the uniform. Now he held the power. But power didn't erase memory, and when the boy cried out, something inside Kédougou cracked. In just a few hours, he would be pointing a gun at the head of the only man who ever called him brother, President Ibrahim Traoré. In the hush of dawn, the private prayer chamber was bathed in dim light. A breeze rustled against high, narrow windows as Ibrahim Traoré knelt, forehead pressed to a worn prayer mat. The scent of incense curled upward, delicate and unresolved. Footsteps approached from behind, measured, soundless, fatal. Kédougou stood just feet away, Glock raised, safety off. His fingers, once trained by war, now trembled under the weight of betrayal. The silence was sacred, until it wasn't. "I took the money," he whispered. $5 million, the kind you don't walk away from. The memory clawed back. A rooftop bar, a white man with a British accent and a diamond pin, sipping mango whiskey. No name, just a code name, Silver Tongue. He had slid across the photo of Traoré kneeling in prayer. "Shoot him when he bows. We don't need a legend, we need a martyr." Now staring at the man he once swore to protect, Kédougou's soul fractured. He and Traoré had trained side by side, bled for their country, buried friends, survived coup after coup. Traoré didn't rise through politics. He rose by staying when others fled. And now Kédougou stood behind him like a coward in a shadow. But this wasn't just greed. No, the rot went deeper. Kédougou had buried his brother, Issoufou, after French-backed forces stormed their village, branding every young black man a terrorist. No trial, no evidence, just death. And though Traoré had no part in that massacre, every time Kédougou saw him, he saw survival, he saw guilt. "I took the money," Kédougou said again, louder. Traoré turned, but did not rise. His voice was calm. "I know." The gun trembled in Kédougou's grip. "I know why you're angry, but you're aiming it at the wrong man." Tears welled in Kédougou's eyes. He had withstood war, torture, betrayal, but this was the wound that finally bled. "You don't understand," he choked. "They killed Issoufou, and then they sent him, Silver Tongue, to buy me like a weapon, like black pain is currency." "I understand," Traoré replied, "because they tried to buy me, too. Offered me a fortune to walk away, to let a puppet rule. I said no. That's why they came to you." Kédougou collapsed to the floor, the gun slipping from his fingers. Outside the chamber, muffled shouting grew louder. Guards, panic, something wrong. Traoré reached over and gently placed the weapon back in Kédougou's hand. "You didn't pull the trigger. That matters." "You're not turning me in?" Kédougou asked, stunned. No court would understand, but truth doesn't always need a courtroom. Sometimes it just needs to be spoken. The door burst open, soldiers, weapons raised. "Hands up." Traoré lifted a hand instead. "Let him speak." And Kédougou did. He spoke of the bribe, of the foreign agent, of the enemy within. That day, Kédougou Bamba didn't fire a bullet. He lit a fuse. Later, in a quiet bar steeped in jazz and shadows, Kédougou waited. The air was thick with the scent of whiskey and history. He hated mango whiskey, but it was his drink. The man in the suit. Silvertongue entered like he owned the air itself. Polished shoes, tailored arrogance, the gaze of a man whose ancestors never heard no. He didn't sit right away, ordered first, always in control. "You're taller than they said," he said, smiling like a wolf. Kudugu didn't answer. "You know this place used to be a slave auction house?" he mused. "Now it serves overpriced steak. Poetry, isn't it?" Kudugu stared, silent, still. Silvertongue leaned in, lowering his voice. "I know about your son, Mamadou, 17, gunned down during a protest, no charge, just another dead boy in a black file." Kudugu's knuckles went white around the edge of the table. Silvertongue opened a briefcase, no weapons, just a gold-trimmed folder. He slid it across the table. Inside, a photo. Traoré in prayer, vulnerable, alone. "You're the only one who can get through that door," he said. "What is this?" Kudugu asked. "A request," Silvertongue said. "Remove the obstacle. Create a hero. Save your country from the fire he's dragging it into." He slid a slim envelope across the table. 5 million. Half now, half after. Already wired. Untouchable. Just like you'll be. Kudugu didn't touch it. "Why me?" "Because people trust you. Because you've lost. And because you don't ask permission." He leaned in, closer. "This isn't betrayal. It's mercy. Let your son's death mean something." That line, that dagger, landed. Kudugu sat back, staring into the swirl of untouched liquor. His silence was his answer. But deep in his soul, something began to burn. Not for vengeance, for reckoning. Now someone was offering Kudugu Bamba justice, or at least the illusion of it. But deep in his gut, he felt the sickness of the game. Silvertongue wasn't here to honor Mamadou's memory. He was here to turn black pain into spectacle, to make one African pull the trigger on another, then call it tribal violence, another excuse for intervention, another reason to say they can't govern themselves. Still, $5 million. Kudugu took the envelope. He said nothing. As Silvertongue stood, he offered one final smile. "When the time comes, don't hesitate. Regret makes the shot shake." And then he vanished into the velvet-lit hallway, leaving Kudugu sitting alone, palm pressed over the envelope, the weight of it heavier than steel. The photo inside burned through his thoughts. Outside, Ouagadougou buzzed with life. Children's laughter, street vendors shouting, sandals slapping against dirt roads. The mosque's minaret pierced the golden sky like a blade through heaven. And Kudugu Bamba began planning a murder he prayed he wouldn't have to commit. But even then, he knew, there would be no silence after this. Before dawn touches the rooftops of the capital, President Ibrahim Traoré walks barefoot across the sand behind the presidential villa. No guards, no cameras, just a pair of sandals in his hand and the distant call to prayer echoing like a memory through the still air. He nods to the old woman sweeping the courtyard. He stops by the kitchen to ask about her son's malaria and promises to pay for stronger medicine from the north. He knows every staff member by name, not for show, because once he too was invisible. In the garden, 2 orphans tend a row of vegetables, part of a program he personally funded after visiting their war-torn village. The youngest, Sif, runs up, hands covered in dirt. "Mr. President, the tomatoes are turning red." Traoré kneels, inspects the tiny fruit, and laughs with the boy, not as a ruler, but as an equal, because to him they are. Inside the palace, the halls echo with calm, but not peace. Behind closed doors and diplomatic smiles, discontent simmers. Some call him reckless, too proud, too defiant, too quick to sever old alliances. They forget he was never supposed to be president. He stepped into the void after betrayal, after generals sold their loyalty, after foreign powers tried carving Burkina Faso like a carcass. He stayed not for glory, but because someone had to. Someone had to hold the line, to believe that this country could stand on its own feet. That belief made him enemies, but it also made Kudugu Bamba pledge his life to him. Years ago, outside Babu Dialasso, they raided a compound suspected of trafficking girls across borders. A routine op, or so they thought. But what they found shattered them. Dozens of girls, drugged, beaten, branded. Among them, Kudugu's sister, Isatu, barely alive. Kudugu froze. Traoré didn't. He wrapped her in his own uniform, whispered prayers as he carried her out through gunfire. No cameras, no speech, just a man refusing to leave another family broken. From that moment on, Kudugu followed him without question. But loyalty can bend under the weight of grief, and time doesn't always heal, especially when corruption keeps reopening the wound. This morning, Traoré kneels in silence. His prayer mat faces the east window, where dawn bleeds softly through. His lips do not move. His prayers live within him, heavy as history. Every choice weighs. Every betrayal felt. Every life lost, carried. He senses something in the stillness, not danger, but disruption. Behind him, a breath catches, a stance falters. Kudugu is in the room. Traoré finishes his prayer. "I took the money," Kudugu says. The silence is immense. Then, slowly, Traoré turns. His expression calm, but his eyes carry the full weight of history, of friendship, betrayal, sorrow, and something deeper than anger. "I know," he says. And in that moment, everything between them, Mahmudu's death, Ishatu's scars, the blood on all their hands hangs heavy in the space, like smoke that refuses to clear. Traoré doesn't shout, doesn't rise. He simply sees Kudugu, sees the man who once followed him through fire, who once knelt beside him in loyalty, and now is lost. He forgives, but forgiveness doesn't cancel consequence. Later that day, a single page reaches the president's desk. An anonymous report. Foreign agents cited in the capital. One name, Silvertongue. Traoré doesn't flinch. He folds the paper and slips it under a worn book of poems. Outside, the old woman sweeping the courtyard murmurs to a guard. Something feels different today. Because it is. Truth is shifting, and with it, the loyalty of a man, torn between memory and mission. The palace walls remain polished, but inside, the foundation is cracking. In Kudugu's modest apartment, the morning heat lingers like a warning. A pistol lies on the table, untouched. He sits on the edge of his cot, staring at a faded photograph. Two boys in a rice field, one raising a fist, the other laughing. A world before pain had a name. Isufu had always been the loud one, the idealist, quoting Sankara on wooden crates in the square, calling for land reform, believing the impossible. Kudugu had always warned him, softly, lovingly. "The world doesn't like loud black boys," he said. But Isufu didn't listen. And one day, French-trained soldiers rolled into town. Their rifles gleamed. Their orders were clear. They shot before they spoke. By the time Kudugu arrived, Isufu lay bleeding in the dust, his fist still raised. There was no trial, no names, just silence. The government claimed he resisted arrest. He resisted with a notebook, with a borrowed microphone. They buried him in a shallow grave behind the mosque. The village lit candles. Kudugu lit rage. He joined the army within a month, not out of patriotism, not even revenge. He joined to learn how power works, who decides who dies, who gets remembered. In the process, he buried parts of himself: compassion, faith, hope. But now the ghosts are waking. And tomorrow, Kudugu Bamba will have to choose whether to be a soldier or something more. Now, sitting alone with that faded photo trembling in his fingers, Kudugu Bamba felt the old heat rising in his chest. But it wasn't just rage anymore. It was something heavier, something harder to name. Because now he stood on the edge of becoming the very thing that had killed his brother, a weapon guided by someone else's hand. Silver Tongue's offer still stood: $5 million, a price for freedom, for justice, or at least the illusion of it. But every time Kudugu pictured pulling the trigger, he heard Isufu's voice echoing from some hidden place in his mind. Not angry, laughing, teasing. "You always think too much, brother. Sometimes you just have to believe." But believe in what? In a nation that let a boy be slaughtered for dreaming too loudly? In a world where men like Silver Tongue could erase revolutions with a signature and a smile? In a leader like Traoré, who stood for independence, yes, but who wore the same uniform, held the same rank, carried the same authority that once crushed the voice of a 19-year-old boy named Isufu. Kudugu didn't blame Traoré for the bullet, but he did blame the silence afterward. There had been no apology, no flags lowered, no day of mourning. Just another promotion handed out 2 weeks later and a shallow grave near the mosque. Still, it was Traoré who carried Isufu Bamba through a war zone wrapped in his own uniform. It was Traoré who looked Kudugu in the eye with no pity, who offered loyalty without demanding worship. Maybe that's what made the decision so hard. Harder than any ambush, any battlefield, any war. He reached into the drawer beside his cot and pulled out Isufu's old armband. Faded red and green, resistance colors. He tied it around his wrist, not for strength, for memory. Outside, the noon call to prayer drifted across rooftops, bouncing through the alleyways of Ouagadougou. But Kudugu didn't move. In one hand, a photo, in the other, a pistol, and between them, only a line he could no longer see, a line between vengeance and justice. That night, Kudugu returned to the place where his brother had fallen. The square had changed. The vendors were gone, replaced with benches and murals. On one wall, a portrait of a faceless man with a raised fist. No name. It didn't need one. Kudugu lit a candle beneath it. As he stood in silence, a boy passed by, soccer ball tucked under his arm. He paused. Did he fight, Kudugu? Kudugu stared at the flame, then at the wall. He believed, he said. The boy nodded, eyes wide. Then I will too. And then he was gone, swallowed by the night. For the first time in years, Kudugu felt something loosen in his chest. Not peace, but possibility. That night he didn't sleep. His confession to Traoré replayed over and over in his head like a looped transmission. The envelope of money sat on the kitchen shelf, unopened. It smelled like rot. But the worst wasn't the money. It was the voice, the ghost with his brother's eyes. It had been 12 years since Isufu Bamba was gunned down outside the radio station where he was supposed to give his first public speech. He was 19, too bold, too hopeful. Kudugu still remembered the way his brother practiced those speeches. Even when no one was listening, Isufu spoke like the crowd was already there. "This country deserves better," he would say, barefoot, pacing with fire in his chest. "We are not the children of colonizers. We are the children of freedom." But freedom didn't save him. That morning had been like any other. Kasala and tea under the tin awning outside their mother's house. Isufu humming protest songs while scribbling ideas in his notebook. Kudugu warned him again, told him to wait, to be careful. Isufu smiled. "If we wait for permission to speak, we'll die in silence," he said. He was halfway through his speech when the trucks rolled in, clean, black, unmarked. The men who stepped out wore French combat gear but spoke with African accents. They didn't blend in. They didn't care to. One of them pointed at Isufu, said something cold, raised his weapon. By the time Kudugu reached him, Isufu was face down in the dirt, blood soaking through his white shirt, his notebook torn to shreds. A single bullet, straight through the heart that once carried revolution. The paramilitaries didn't stop there. They took 5 more boys. No charges, no names, just silence. Kudugu stayed by the grave that night while the imam whispered prayers. His fists bled from how tightly he'd clenched them. At dawn, he walked into the army recruitment office. Not for duty, not for patriotism, but to learn how power moved. Who gave the orders? Who erased lives like chalk from a blackboard? Now, years later, the silence had returned, but this time, Kudugu was the one holding the weapon. And he didn't know how to forgive himself for that. Even without pulling the trigger, he had still taken the offer. Was that justice for Isufu, or just repeating the same violence in a different uniform? He remembered what Silver Tongue had said about stability, order, peace. But Isupu's words rang louder now. The people who ask you to kill in silence never bleed with you after. Kudugu walked to the window. The city was waking, the sky pale and bruised. A girl sold flatbread from a tin cart on the corner. A barefoot boy ran past her, laughing. He saw his brother everywhere now. He took the old photo from his pocket, creased, faded, but still alive with Isufu's smile. He pressed it to his chest. And in that silence, one question burned louder than all the others. What does justice look like when the same hands that killed your brother now want to use yours? He didn't find an answer that morning, but something inside shifted. Not peace, not clarity, but resistance. Not against Traoré, but against the lie that vengeance could ever lead to healing. The palace courtyard smelled of jasmine and charcoal. The wind came early, it always did, before the storm. Naima Zongo knew that wind. She moved through the herb garden with a basket on her hip, steps light, eyes alert, watching the way only survivors know how. She had seen him, Kudugu Bamba, not just walking, not just watching. She had seen the gun in his hand, She had seen the war in his eyes. He hadn't fired, but something in him had shifted, broken open. He was no longer the man who joked during guard duty or offered her tea when the world was quiet. She didn't tell anyone yet. Silence, after all, could be a kind of power. But secrets, too, carry weight, and this one pulled at her like a stone tied to her ribs, because she recognized the look in Kudugu's eyes. It was the same look she had seen in her brother before he vanished. The look of a man who had been asked to choose between justice and survival, and was about to choose neither. Years ago, Naima Zongo wasn't sweeping palace stones, she was tracking war criminals, a field agent in a quiet, powerful, anti-corruption task force formed during the collapse of the old regime. They had teeth, reach, and enemies. But then the funding stopped, foreign support vanished. The program was dissolved, quietly. Her husband, a journalist, disappeared soon after. No body, just the echo of his voice in scattered notebooks. Pages filled with names, oil contracts, French arms deals, and money that vanished just as Traoré rose to power. Naima applied to the palace under a different name. No one asked questions. Maids were ghosts in uniforms, and that invisibility kept her alive. But now, she had seen something she couldn't unsee. She had watched Kudugu Bamba raise a gun behind President Traoré, and she hadn't screamed, she hadn't moved, because in his face she didn't see a traitor. She saw a man already breaking under the weight of something too deep to name, a man who had lost more than he knew how to carry. Later that afternoon, she returned to the same courtyard, an old straw broom in hand, sweeping the stones as guards passed her without a glance. She preferred it that way. Kudugu entered alone from the west archway, eyes bloodshot, posture straight, contained like a soldier forced into calm. He didn't notice her at first. He paused beneath a fig tree, laid a hand against its bark, bowed his head as if asking something from it. "You didn't do it," Naima said softly. Kudugu spun around fast, hand instinctively dropping to his hip. She didn't flinch. "If you had," she continued, "the silence in this place would have been louder." His eyes narrowed, confused, cautious. "What did you see?" "Enough to know your hands are heavier than they used to be." He stepped closer, not with threat, but with wariness. "Who are you?" "Someone who used to ask dangerous questions. Someone who knows what it looks like when a man walks the edge between justice and revenge." His voice dropped, low, raw. "I didn't plan to. I told him. I said I took the money. I thought I could do it, but I couldn't." Naima studied him in silence. A long moment passed. "But you still accepted it," she said. "You let the line move." He looked down. "I did, and now I don't know who I am. If I speak, I burn the palace. If I stay quiet, I become what they paid me to be." She saw it then, not just guilt, but torment, a man drowning in memory, but still searching for meaning. "I used to think truth was a blade," she whispered. "Now I know. It's a seed. You bury it in pain, water it with time, and wait." Kudugu stepped back, uncertain. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to survive, and I want this country to stop burying its best men." She turned to leave, broom in hand. At the corner she stopped. "If you choose to speak," she said over her shoulder, "don't do it alone. They'll bury you faster than you buried your brother." Kudugu froze. "How do you know about him?" But she was already gone. That night, beneath her mattress, Naima unlocked a drawer and removed a leather folder sealed with twine. Inside, names, wire transfers, military shipment logs, intelligence briefings, photographs. Every secret she'd collected before the task force was dismantled. One name circled in red: Silver Tongue. She traced it with her finger. Outside, the wind shifted, jasmine and dust, and beneath it something older, the scent of war returning. General Dio didn't trust silence. He believed in controlled noise, recorded, translated, weaponized. His office, hidden beneath the National Security Wing, buzzed softly with encrypted feeds and surveillance hum. He wore no medals anymore, just the jacket, a pen behind his ear, and the calm of a man who knew how to wage war without firing a bullet. That morning, hours before dawn, he reviewed the file labeled Operation Whisper. Inside, intercepted messages, financial trails, one line redacted except for its final words. Subject KB was offered 5 MD for target acquisition, no execution. He didn't need the initials spelled out. Kudugu Bamba, Traoré's shadow, his conscience, his blade, and now possibly a loaded gun pointed at the presidency. The wiretap was not a mistake. A junior analyst flagged suspicious encrypted traffic from Ouagadougou to a Marrakesh-based server. The transfer was swift, unmarked, large. The name Silver Tongue appeared twice, once linked to a location ping at the Royal Bay Hotel. That was enough, but Dio didn't move. Timing was everything. If he acted too early, he could fracture the presidential guard, undermine faith, spark whispers. Traoré's power came from belief in sovereignty, solidarity, sacrifice. A betrayal inside the palace? That would be a wildfire in a country built from dry bones. So Dio waited and watched. He put Kudugu under discreet surveillance. No arrests, no orders, just eyes. What he saw unsettled him. Kudugu roamed the city alone, visited graves, spoke to no one, stood at the prayer chamber with a gun in hand, twice. Each time he walked away. And that was the problem. A man who kills is simple. A man who hesitates. He's chaos, unpredictable, dangerous. That man might confess, or worse, rewrite the story. Now Naima Zongo entered the frame. Her file had no official record before 2015. Multilingual, former wife of a vanished journalist. Quiet, unassuming, watching everything. Dio had her background pulled offline, paper only, no trace. Something was taking shape, and he didn't like the silhouette. 3 people. Kudugu, the blade turned inward. Naima, the memory that never died. Traoré, the fire too stubborn to be extinguished. Traoré had torn up every French defense agreement without flinching. He refused NATO alignment. He didn't play by the script, and that made him dangerous. Dio, the soldier, respected him, but Dio, the strategist, saw a fire that could not be contained. He lit a cigarette, his old vice, revived only when things got messy. A soft knock broke the silence. Colonel Idrissa Tembore stepped inside, eyes lowered. "Sir, surveillance confirms Zongo and Bamba spoke in the courtyard. 10 minutes, no audio. She's either careful or trained." Dio didn't look up. "Increase surveillance, bring me her file in hard copy, no digital trail." "Yes, sir." When the door closed, Dio turned to the wall-length map of Burkina Faso, carved by colonizers, still bleeding at the borders. He'd spent his life trying to hold this country together. Now its future rested on 3 broken hearts. He walked to the window. Below, guards stood sweating in ceremonial uniforms. Among them, Kudugu Bamba, unmoving, watching everything. A blade not drawn, not sheathed, waiting. "What are you waiting for, soldier?" he muttered. Something had to break. A gunshot, a broadcast, a revelation. He picked up the phone, dialed an encrypted line. A voice answered, dry, amused. Silvertongue. "Your timeline is collapsing," the man said. Dio exhaled smoke. "It depends. Do we still have your support?" A pause. Long. Measured. Then. "I don't support chaos, but I know how to survive it." And he hung up. The war wasn't coming. It had already started. The rain came gently that night, not like a storm, more like a memory returning through the ceiling. Each drop slid down the clay roof above Naima Zongo's quarters, tapping against the shuttered windows like a ghost with unfinished business. She sat cross-legged on the floor, the flame of a single candle flickering beside her. Before her sat a rusted trunk, hidden beneath loose floorboards for nearly a decade. No one in the palace knew it existed, just as no one truly knew the woman who occupied this room. They saw a quiet maid, good posture, soft voice, the kind who remembered your tea exactly how you liked it. But before she dusted presidential tables, Naima Zongo had worn a different uniform. She unlocked the trunk with steady hands, like reopening a scar. Inside was a thick leather folder, black, smooth at the edges from years of touch. It had no name. It didn't need one. She knew what lived inside. The last ghost of an operation that never officially existed. Naima had once gone by the code name Machicel, a field agent in a secret West African anti-corruption task force, funded quietly by European partners. Their mission was simple: expose espionage channels, unravel laundering routes, and dismantle the influence operations hollowing Burkina Faso from within. It began with idealism. It ended in silence and smoke. Her husband, Sadu, had been the first to believe in her, a journalist obsessed with truth, reckless in pursuit. He gave her leads, she gave him access. Together they uncovered one of the largest illicit arms networks on the continent. And then he vanished. No body, no charges. Just a file marked closed, and her wedding ring returned in a plain envelope. The task force dissolved overnight. The men they exposed were quietly reinstated. Some promoted. Naima disappeared into kitchens, then cleaning crews. Eventually, she walked into the presidential palace under a different name. Survival had its price, and hers was silence. Until now. She opened the folder. Inside, passports, redacted memos, voice logs, grainy surveillance stills. A list of 27 names: generals, businessmen, foreign agents, men who traded lives for contracts and loyalty for leverage. And on the last page, circled in red, Jean-Marc Duvalier, alias Silvertongue. She hadn't seen the name in years. She'd assumed he was dead or reassigned, ghosted back into Europe's diplomatic shadows. But he was here now in Burkina Faso, slipping bribes into hands, whispering behind curtains, turning men like Kudugu into question marks. She flipped to the transcript attached to his file, an old recording picked up accidentally during a failed bug on a hotel meeting. "If Traoré resists," Duvalier had said, "we don't kill him outright. We let the Africans destroy him. Nothing crushes hope like betrayal from your own." The words buzzed on the page like they were still alive. This wasn't just about one man with a gun. It was about a blueprint designed to rot a nation from within. And someone else knew. General Euro had to. Men like him didn't stay blind by accident. She closed the folder, her heart pounding, and wrapped it in a strip of cloth like it was sacred. Not a file, a weapon. Then she paused. A shadow flickered past the window. Too quiet, too quick. She blew out the candle and melted into the darkness. Someone was watching. Maybe one of Euro's men. Maybe worse. She slipped out through the servants' passage, taking the eastern corridor, careful to avoid the creaking tiles. She moved like breath, barely there. The old chapel ruin stood behind the palace, a place where President Traoré sometimes prayed alone. It was abandoned now, cracked by time. Beneath a broken stone cross, Naima dug a shallow hole and buried a copy of the black file. Insurance. The storm arrived as she returned to her room. Lightning sliced the sky. Rain fell harder now. The game had changed. Jean-Marc Duvalier, Silver Tongue, stepped off a private jet onto a shadowed airfield outside Ouagadougou. No customs, no checks, no questions. His people had paved the way. He looked every bit the polished diplomat, tailored suit, black-tinted glasses, effortless confidence. But the name on his passport wasn't real. Today, he moved under a different alias. In the right rooms, though, the old name still traveled. Silver Tongue. A man who could start wars with half a sentence. A man who could destroy presidencies without ever being photographed with a weapon. He didn't kill with bullets. He killed with doubt. And this time, he wasn't here to wait. He was here to finish. Inside a black sedan with mirrored windows, Duvalier studied a satellite map glowing on his tablet, the Grand Square of Unity, where Traoré would address the nation for Independence Day. Hundreds of thousands would watch. A perfect stage for either triumph or collapse. Beside him sat a young operative, stiff with nerves, dressed in gray. "Everything's in place," the young man said in French, "but the payload is larger than expected." Duvalier didn't look up. "Larger is fine, so long as it doesn't fail." "It won't. We've planted it beneath the media van. When it goes off, no one will trace the source." Duvalier zoomed in on the stage. He spoke calmly, coldly. "The goal isn't to kill him." The operative blinked. "It's not?" "No. Killing Traoré makes him a martyr. We don't want rage in the streets. We want doubt. We want every eye on that screen wondering, who let this happen? We want his own people to suspect him." He smiled faintly. "This isn't an assassination. It's an infection." Back at the palace, President Traoré sat in a high-ceilinged room reviewing updates with his intelligence chief. Drone footage, border traffic, surveillance anomalies. On the surface, calm. Beneath it, tension. Something didn't feel right. Old instincts stirred, the kind that had kept him alive in ambushes and smoke-filled valleys. Koudougou stood nearby, present, silent, changed. Traoré could feel it. Something was shifting inside his most trusted man. And the storm was already on the horizon. Traoré hadn't spoken to him since the confession, not out of anger, but out of observation. He was watching Koudougou now, because sometimes silence reveals more than confrontation. That evening, Naima Zongo returned to the chapel ruins. She crouched beneath the broken cross and checked the soil. The copy of the black file was still there, undisturbed, but her nerves were anything but steady. She'd seen a car that didn't belong, idling too long near the servants' gate. Two unfamiliar men in the west corridor wore standard uniforms, but they moved like ghosts, not soldiers, operators. She recognized the way they scanned their environment, how their boots made no sound. She'd trained men like them once. The next morning, the city awoke in celebration mode. Vendors painted flags, children rehearsed songs, soldiers drilled in perfect sync. But beneath the joy, in the shadows, wires were being tucked into corners, transmitters hidden beneath tables. A signal receiver calibrated beneath a broadcast van, stationed beside the national media crew. In a sleek hotel suite across town, Silvertongue sipped espresso, watching the live feed on a secure tablet. Calm, crisp, surgical. "When the drums start," he said into a mic, "wait 10 seconds, then press." He shut the tablet and stood at the window, gazing out at the city. A city that still believed in its leader. Not for long, he thought. Belief is fragile. All it takes is the right explosion to shatter it. The smell of rain still clung to the palace walls, even though the storm had passed hours ago. Everything looked polished. Soldiers marched in sync. Servants moved soundlessly. The marble shined like glass. But something was off. You could feel it in the way the air held its breath. Gudugu Bamba stood at the east wing, watching 2 new vehicles roll through the ironed gates. Unmarked, shielded windows, tires too clean for rural roads. The men who stepped out didn't salute. They didn't need to. He clocked them in silence. Whatever they'd come for, it was already in motion. Naima found him near the kitchen entrance. Her voice was taut, controlled. "We need to talk, now." She led him to the laundry building, the roar of old machines masking their words. From beneath her apron, she pulled a single page, a worn photocopy, edges curled, ink faded, but the signatures were still visible. "This came from the black file," she whispered. "I buried the original, but I remembered this name." Gudugu scanned it. His eyes froze halfway down. "Dio," she said, "your general, your friend." The memo was dated 7 months ago. It appeared to be a basic logistics request, but embedded deep in the language was a clearance code, Traoré's clearance level. Destination, Marrakesh. Purpose, strategic logistics facilitation. Translation, a backdoor entry authorization, the kind that lets Silvertongue bypass every checkpoint, every question. Dio gave him access, Naima said. He opened the door. It wasn't a break-in, it was an invitation. The words didn't hit Gudugu like a bullet. They hit like silence, the kind that comes when you realize the man who stood beside you on the battlefield had been feeding your coordinates to the enemy all along. He sat down, heavy and hollow. "I trusted him," he whispered. Naima didn't reply. She let it hang in the air like smoke. "He watched me fall apart," he murmured. "He knew, and he waited, because if I pulled the trigger, he'd never have to get his hands dirty." It all came back, Dio's careful words, his measured loyalty, a man who served Traoré when it suited him, but never bled for him. A man who treated power like chess. And somewhere along the line Dio had traded his soul, not for money, but for influence, for control. He turned to her. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're still deciding," Naima said, "whether to protect the man who gave you purpose or the one who gave the order that might kill him." "I don't know what purpose means anymore." "You do," she said. "You just don't like what it's asking you to do." He looked away. "If I speak, I destroy everything, the guard, the unity, Traoré's presidency." "If you stay silent," she said, "they'll do it anyway, and your silence will be what gives them cover." Outside the bell rang 3 times. Final security checks before the national address. Gudugu walked to the window. The courtyard was full now, troops assembling, drones rising, preparations complete. He saw the lawn where he once trained recruits. He remembered planning strategy with Dio. He remembered believing in what they were building. But now he wasn't even sure what was left to protect. He turned back to Naima, something new in his eyes. "If we move," he said, "we need proof, real proof." Naima nodded. "I still have the file." "Then I'll get into the security comms. If that bomb's wired, I need to know who's holding the switch." They didn't speak again. They just moved, because this wasn't just politics anymore. This was a countdown. The day of the speech arrived wrapped in sunlight and ceremony. Across Ouagadougou, flags waved from rooftops, children clutched paper banners, brass bands filled the avenue, vendors grilled meat, oranges sliced open in sticky hands. The city was ready to celebrate. And somewhere under one of them, a fuse waited to be lit. Kédougou Bamba stood at the inner perimeter, dressed in full ceremonial uniform. His heart pounded, not with pride, but with dread. He had checked the vehicles. He had reviewed the guards. But something still felt wrong. Something was missing. He scanned the rooftops, the windows, every eye in the crowd. The broadcast vans were 50 feet behind the stage. That's where it would be if the plan was still active. And time was running out. Beside him, a junior guard spoke, nervous, uncertain. "Sir, is everything all right?" Kédougou didn't respond. He couldn't. His eyes were locked on the square. Across the plaza, inside the VIP tent, General Dio adjusted his lapel with the ease of a man who'd already played his move. His expression calm, posture perfect. Around him, foreign dignitaries murmured small talk and fanned themselves in the heat. Dio didn't look at Kédougou. He didn't need to. Inside the chapel ruins behind the palace, Naima Zongo had just dug up the black file when her comm unit crackled. A scrambled signal, old military encryption. Kédougou's voice broke through, distorted, clipped, but urgent. He said, "They moved it. Not under the media van anymore. It's in the supply truck, by the Western Mosque. Get out of there." Naima froze. The Western Mosque? Right behind the stage? It had been added to the president's route just days ago, when Traoré insisted on walking through the crowd to greet elders, to be seen as one of them, symbolic, humble, human. Now, it was a trap. Naima didn't hesitate. She grabbed the file, jammed it into her satchel, and ran. At exactly noon, the drums began. President Traoré stepped into the light, flanked by guards. He raised a hand to greet the sea of citizens, children on shoulders, mothers waving flags, old men pressing their hearts to their hats. He smiled and walked toward the mosque. 10 seconds later, the world cracked open. The explosion wasn't loud. It was sharp, surgical. A flash of heat and pressure ripped through the western side of the mosque. 2 parked cars lifted into the air. Stone became dust. Screams tore through the square like a chorus of panic. Chaos swept over everything. Kédougou ran. He found Traoré bleeding on the ground, his tunic soaked red near the shoulder, eyes dazed but alive. Kédougou dropped beside him, pressing down on the wound, shouting for medics. Around them, confusion, radio chatter, civilians pinned down, soldiers screaming orders, panic flaring like a wildfire. Then, slowly, one word began to spread. Bunba. A whisper. A murmur. Then a chant. Someone had seen him near the broadcast trucks earlier. Someone remembered he didn't salute at the last checkpoint. Someone else claimed he had hesitated, looked wrong. In moments, suspicion hardened into accusation. Through the smoke, General Dio appeared, composed, precise. He raised a hand and spoke in a clear, lethal voice. "Place him in custody." Kudugu rose to his feet, fists clenched. "You let this happen," he shouted. Dio didn't blink. "You accepted $5 million. There are witnesses. We have proof." Kudugu turned to Traoré, bleeding, barely conscious, loaded onto a stretcher. "I didn't plant it," Kudugu growled. Dio stepped closer. "Then why did it explode on your watch? You were tasked to secure that route." Soldiers moved in. Just then, Naima burst through the crowd shouting his name. But she was too late. The cuffs clicked shut around Kudugu's wrists. The roar of helicopters drowned out her cries. Civilians sobbed, pressed against barricades. Somewhere, someone prayed. The square had become a crime scene, and hope had just been carried away on a stretcher. 3 civilians were dead, 2 elders, 1 child. The national broadcast cut to black. By nightfall, every screen in the country repeated the same headline: "Failed coup in Burkina Faso, senior guard in custody, president injured, public in shock." Kudugu sat shackled in a cold holding room beneath the palace, alone. In General Dio's office, a locked drawer held a second black file, one that told a very different story. The rain returned on the second night, soft at first, then relentless. It poured over Ouagadougou's rooftops, over the blood-stained plaza, over a city frozen in fear. Markets emptied, radios whispered, and the same question echoed through every alley: where is Kudugu? Naima Zongo heard the rumors before sunrise. They said he'd confessed and been executed in secret. They said foreign agents had helped him escape. They said he was chained in the palace dungeon, screaming into stone. No one knew, but Naima knew one thing: Kudugu didn't plant that bomb. And if he was alive, he needed help. If he wasn't, then she needed to know who buried the truth with him. She began at an old safe house behind a shuttered bookstore on Rue d'Anlay, a relic from her Machizel days. She keyed in the passcode. No response, no signal. The place had been dead for years. Next, a cellar behind a butcher shop in Sector 9. An old smuggler sat there shaking hands and a graying beard. He owed her. When she showed him Kudugu's photo, he just whispered, "He's either gone or hiding so deep he's forgotten his own name." Naima didn't stop. She retraced every moment from the explosion. She talked to street vendors, medics, guards. Bit by bit, the truth bled out. Kudugu vanished between the command center and the detainment wing. 10 minutes, gone. Someone helped him, that much was certain. But the deeper she dug, the louder the threats. A note appeared in her laundry basket. Blank on one side, on the other, "Go back to silence." She ignored it. The next day, a government SUV followed her for 4 blocks, then vanished. That night, someone jiggled her door lock. They left only when they heard her revolver click. She wasn't afraid. She'd buried fear with her husband long ago. On the 4th day, she returned to the chapel ruins. The rain pooled around broken stone. Fabric from the explosion still clung to the bushes. And behind the altar, something glinted. A dog tag half buried in mud. She wiped it clean. Kudugu's initials. She pressed it to her chest, jaw clenched. He was still out there, and so was the truth. That night, Naima Zongo met a journalist she once trusted. They sat beneath a leaking awning at a cafe that still served coffee strong enough to silence doubt. Rain tapped the tin roof. She slid a stack of photocopied documents across the table, pages from the black file, names, codes, clearance stamps. One line linked General Yairo directly to the authorization that brought Silvertongue into the country. The journalist went pale. For a long time he said nothing. Then, "I can't publish this yet. They'd burn the whole city to keep this quiet." Naima didn't flinch. "Then hide it," she said, "but don't let it die." She walked home beneath a sky thick with thunder. Somewhere out there, Kudugu was bleeding, hiding, or waiting for the right moment to strike back. She didn't know which, but she could feel it. The air had changed, the way it does before lightning finds the ground. Just before dawn, a knock came at her door. When she opened it, no one stood outside, only an envelope on the floor. Inside, a grainy photo. Kudugu, wounded but alive, sitting in an abandoned warehouse. On the back, in jagged handwriting, "The truth lives underground." Naima stared at the words, breath caught in her chest. He was alive, and if he was still fighting from the shadows, then she would become his eyes in the light. The road to the desert safe house wasn't on any map. It carved through scorched red clay and brittle grass, terrain only rebels and ghosts knew by name. Naima drove with the windows down, scarf wrapped tight, sweat rolling down her spine. Inside the safe house, Kudugu Bamba stood in front of a camera, bruised but unbroken. A producer adjusted the mic. The live broadcast was ready. Kudugu leaned in. "This isn't about one bomb or one man. It's about how they use our pain to steal what belongs to us, how they teach us to doubt each other so they can profit from the ashes." Then, the studio doors burst open. 2 armed guards rushed in. Kudugu raised his hands, calm. "Don't cut the feed," he told the producer. "Let it finish." As they cuffed him, the mic stayed live. Then another voice came over the broadcast, clear, unwavering, Naima's. "This is proof. Proof of the clearance orders, proof of the shell company, proof of the bribes. We've uploaded it to every public channel. Every journalist, every student network, every embassy now has a copy." The signal spread like wildfire. Phones lit up. Radios crackled in kitchens and screens and cafes, froze on Kudugu's face. The country that once called him a traitor now heard the truth. And across the capital, the people began to move. By dawn, the streets of Ouagadougou were overflowing, not with soldiers or tanks, but with people. Old men in robes, mothers with babies tied to their backs, teenagers holding signs painted by hand. "Truth is not treason. Justice is our right." From every neighborhood they came. They didn't wait for orders. They didn't wait for permission. They marched to the gates of the palace, to the Ministry of Defense, to the halls where silence once ruled. They came not with rage, but with truth. Inside the palace, General Dio watched from a high window. His face unreadable, but his silence screamed. He had survived foreign coups, secret mutinies, betrayals. But he had never faced this, his own people, fully awake. Then 2 members of the Transitional Council entered. They didn't speak at first. They placed a single sheet of paper on his desk. Effective immediately, General Dio was relieved of duty, stripped of rank, barred from public office, ratified by unanimous vote, signed by the president. He read the words, then picked up his pen and signed. No speech, no protest. He walked past the corridor of framed portraits, stopped briefly beneath one yet to be hung, Traoré. Then he kept walking. Elsewhere in the palace, Ibrahim Traoré sat upright for the first time in days. His bandaged shoulder throbbed, but he refused the morphine. A physician helped him into a clean tunic. 2 guards steadied his steps as he walked down the long corridor. He wasn't just returning to a podium. He was returning to the people, after nearly being erased. When he stepped onto the palace balcony, a hush fell over the city. Tens of thousands stood below, waiting. He looked out, faces filled with pain, hope, and fire. He spoke. "I should not be alive. That is not a metaphor, that is a fact. I was meant to die last week, but something greater than bullets protected me. And today I stand not because my body survived, but because your belief in the truth survived." He looked directly into the camera. "Ibrahim Traoré is not a perfect man, but I have never sold my country, I have never sold my people, and those who have will no longer be protected by silence." The crowd roared, then quieted again. "There is one name I must speak today, a name wrongly disgraced, a man who carried the weight of betrayal, not because he gave in, but because he resisted." He paused. Kudugu Bamba. The name echoed through radios, across rooftops, into every heart. "I grant him full pardon, not because he was perfect, but because when it mattered most, he told the truth. He did what the law could not. He chose not to pull the trigger, and for that we are all still standing." In a side alley, behind the radio station, Naima stood quietly, one hand on her chest, eyes closed. She didn't cry, she didn't move. She just breathed. That night, there were no riots, no sirens. The people lit candles. They played music. They told stories. The city exhaled. In a holding room beneath the station, a young guard opened Kudugu's cell. "You're free," he said. Kudugu stepped into the hall, the light warmer than anything he'd seen in years. A small boy ran up to him, handed him a folded slip of paper. On it, written in a child's careful scrawl, "Thank you for not shooting." Kudugu read it, then smiled, for the first time in years. That night, Naima Zongo met a journalist she once trusted. They sat beneath a rusted awning in a forgotten cafe where the roof leaked onto the chipped floor. She slid a folder across the table, copies from the black file, clearance codes, shell companies, direct links between General Yarrow and Silvertongue's entry into the country. The journalist went pale. He stared at the pages for a long time, lips pressed tight. "I can't publish this, not now. They'd set the whole city on fire before letting this see daylight." Naima didn't blink. "Then hide it, but don't let it die." She walked home under a sky heavy with thunder, feeling the tension humming through the air, the kind that comes before lightning splits the ground. Somewhere out there, Kudugu was bleeding, hiding, or waiting to strike. She didn't know which, but she knew one thing: he was still fighting. Just before dawn, a knock. Naima opened the door slowly. No one stood outside, just an envelope. Inside, a grainy photo. Kudugu, slumped in a warehouse corner, wounded, alive. On the back, in rough handwriting, "The truth lives underground." Naima's breath caught. If he was still alive, still resisting, then she would be his voice in the daylight. The road to the desert safe house wasn't marked on any map. It wound through dry clay and brittle grass, where even the wind remembered old rebellions. Naima drove with the windows down, scarf wrapped tight, sweat sliding down her spine. Inside the safe house, Kutugu stood in front of a dusty microphone, bruised, bloodied, but unbroken. This isn't about a bomb or one man. This is about how they use our grief to take what's ours, how they teach us to doubt each other so they can profit from the silence. Then the studio doors burst open. 2 guards, weapons raised. Kutugu lifted his hands, calm. "Don't cut the feed," he said to the producer. "Let it finish." As they cuffed him, the mic stayed live. Then a second voice broke through the speakers, sharp, steady, and unmistakable. Naima. Her pre-recorded message had been triggered, the timing perfect. "This is proof," she said. "Proof of the clearance, proof of the shell company, proof of every dirty transaction. We've sent it to every public channel. Every journalist in West Africa has a copy. Every embassy, every student network. They can't bury it now." The signal caught fire. Phones buzzed. Radios screamed in kitchens and taxis. Screens froze on Kutugu's face. The country that had once called him traitor now listened. And across the capital, the people began to rise. Before sunrise, Ouagadougou overflowed, not with tanks, not with soldiers, with people. Old men in long robes, mothers with babies strapped to their backs, teenagers holding signs painted by hand. Truth is not treason. Justice is our right. They came from every direction. No one gave the order. No one needed to. They marched to the gates of the palace, to ministries, to the places where silence used to reign. They demanded names. They demanded answers. They demanded Dio. Inside the palace, General Dio watched from a high window, still, expressionless. But his silence screamed. He had survived foreign plots, internal betrayal, even war. But he had never seen this, his own people fully awake. 2 members of the Transitional Council entered. Without a word, one placed a single page on his desk. Effective immediately, relieved of duty, stripped of rank, barred from public office, signed by the president, ratified unanimously. Dio stared at it, then quietly signed the bottom. No speech, no resistance. He walked past the long hall of presidential portraits, pausing under the empty frame meant for Traoré. Then he disappeared down the corridor, into history. Elsewhere in the palace, Ibrahim Traoré sat upright for the first time in days. His shoulder burned with every movement, but he refused sedation. A clean tunic, 2 guards at his side. He wasn't walking to a stage. He was walking back into the light. When he appeared on the palace balcony, tens of thousands went silent. He stood, looking out across the square, a nation held together by breath. He leaned into the microphone. "I should not be alive," he said softly. "That is not a metaphor. That is a fact. Last week, I was meant to die, but something greater than bullets protected me. And today I stand not just because I survived, but because your belief in the truth did too." He paused. "I am not a perfect man, but I have never sold my country. I have never sold my people. And those who have will no longer be shielded by silence." The crowd roared, then once again quieted. There is one name I must speak today, a name wrongly disgraced, a man who carried betrayal, not because he gave in, but because he refused to. He took a breath. Kudugu Bamba. The name echoed like thunder. I hereby grant him full pardon, not because he was flawless, but because when it mattered most, he told the truth. He reminded us that justice isn't always found in courts. Sometimes it's in a whisper, in a refusal, in not pulling the trigger. Some cried, some cheered, but all of them believed. In a back alley behind the radio station, Naima Zongo leaned against a wall, one hand pressed to her chest, eyes closed. Not praying, not hoping, just finally breathing. That night, there were no riots, no gunshots, no sirens. The people lit candles, played drums, told stories of courage. In the holding cell beneath the station, a young guard opened the door. You're free. Kudugu stepped into the hall. The light seemed warmer than the sun. A little boy ran to him, handed him a folded scrap of paper. Inside, written in a child's careful hand, "Thank you for not shooting." Kudugu read it, and for the first time in years, he smiled. That's not a metaphor, that's a fact. President Ibrahim Traoré's voice rang out across the silent city square. I was meant to die last week, but something greater than bullets protected me. And today, I don't stand here because my body survived, I stand here because your belief in the truth did. He looked directly into the cameras, no notes, no shield, just a man and his people. Ibrahim Traoré is not a perfect man, but I have never sold my country. I have never sold my people, and those who have, no matter their rank, will no longer be protected by silence. The crowd roared, and then fell still again, waiting. He took a breath, slower now. I must say one name today, a name dragged through betrayal, not because he surrendered, but because he refused to. A pause, heavy, sacred. Kudugu Bamba. The name echoed across rooftops, from radios, through open windows. In homes and streets, people turned to each other, wide-eyed, hands over mouths. I grant him full pardon, not because he was flawless, but because he told the truth when it mattered most. He did what our laws could not, reminded us that justice is not always found in courts. Sometimes it's in a whisper, in silence, in the choice not to pull the trigger. Tears fell across the square, across the country. In a narrow alley behind the radio station, Naima Zongo stood motionless, one hand pressed to her chest, eyes closed, listening. Traoré's final words were quiet, but unshakable. This land belongs to no general, no foreign hand. It belongs to the people, and today, the people rose. Today, you wrote history. That night, there were no fires, no barricades, just candlelight, laughter, music rising from courtyards like prayer. People told stories again. Beneath the radio station, in a holding cell, a guard opened the door. "You're free." Kudugu stepped out slowly, the hallway somehow brighter than daylight. A small boy waited at the end, holding a crumpled piece of paper. He handed it over, shy and proud. On it, written in a child's careful hand, "Thank you for not shooting." Kudugu smiled. Not the smile of victory, but of something deeper, the kind that only returns when the weight lifts. Far from the capital, beneath the wide arms of an old baobab tree, the wind moved gently through its leaves, like fingers flipping through a quiet book. The sun stretched low across the clay fields. Golden light touched everything. Kudugu sat alone on a wooden bench, back straight, hands resting gently on his knees. The wound in his shoulder had healed, but the ache remained, not of pain, but of memory. Behind him stood a small home, tin roof, stone stove, built by hand. No uniforms, no orders, just hammers and time, a life rebuilt from what had nearly been lost. A soft laugh broke the stillness, a child's laugh. Naima Zongo walked up the path, holding her daughter's hand. The girl wore a yellow scarf and carried a basket of mangoes. She ran ahead, hugged Kudugu's leg, then darted off to chase chickens near the fence. Naima walked slower. She looked thinner, older, but steadier, like iron reshaped by fire. "You made it," he said, rising. "You thought I wouldn't. I wasn't sure anyone would want to see me again." She smiled, handed him a mango. "You're more famous than the president now. There's a mural of you near the old railway. You're wearing sunglasses for some reason." Kudugu laughed. "I never wore sunglasses." "Exactly. That's why I like it." They sat side by side, in silence for a while, watching the little girl chase a goat between the trees. The village around them hummed, pots on fires, voices singing, wood being split, the sound of peace returning to ordinary life. Naima spoke softly. "She asks about you all the time, wants to know why people say your name like it's part of a story." "And what do you tell her?" "I tell her you're the man who told the truth when it mattered, the man who saved him." Kudugu looked down. "She doesn't know what I almost did." Naima turned toward him. "But you didn't, and that matters." He nodded, but the silence between them still held weight. She leaned in. "You saved him, yes, but you saved yourself, too." His eyes drifted closed. He saw Isufu's face, his brother, the rally, the bullet, the blood. But this time, the memory wasn't the end. This time, it was followed by the moment he stepped into the radio booth, unarmed, unafraid, ready to tell the truth no matter the cost. "I thought it would end with justice, but it didn't. It ended with truth." Naima smiled gently. "Truth is justice, the kind that lasts." Her daughter returned, curled into her lap, and fell asleep against her shoulder. The sun dipped lower. The shadows of the baobab stretched wide across the dirt. Somewhere nearby, a flute played, soft, like breath. Naima looked across the fields. "So, what happens now?" Kudugu didn't answer immediately. He watched the girl sleep. He looked at the tree, then said, "Now we live. We plant things. We teach them not to fear silence. And when they ask what happened, we tell it, not with medals, not with myths, just the truth." Naima leaned her head against his shoulder. Quiet. He whispered, eyes fixed on the horizon, "Let them write history. We lived it.